This is the mysterious white 200-foot buoy currently floating around Puget Sound. It's known as Ocean 2, which was created by Panthalassa, a startup company in Portland. It was deployed off Everett Ship Repair almost a month ago to test and create clean, renewable energy.
The biggest bottlenecks facing AI data centers are not microchips or algorithms. It's land, freshwater, energy, and the will of the people who do not want these data centers in their backyard.
This Google data center in the U.S. state of Oregon is large enough to run computations needed for AI applications. A typical data center covers an area of about 9,000 square meters. This one is 13 times bigger. It's called a hyperscale data center. Packing in more servers means a lot more cooling. Google's hyperscaler in the Dalles, Oregon, used nearly a third of its city's water supply in 2021, according to public records obtained by the state's largest newspaper. Relying on water for cooling is a common approach. That's why when you look closely at this map, you see big clusters of data centers here, close to fresh water. Nearly a tenth of the world's data centers are in this part of the U.S. The region is called the Great Lakes and is home to 1/5 of the world's surface fresh water, much of it naturally cold. Using it lets data centers spend far less electricity on cooling.
A single hyperscale AI data center consumes as much electricity as 100,000 homes. Keeping thousands of high-density GPUs from melting down requires evaporating millions of gallons of municipal drinking water every single day. On land, terrestrial data centers are hitting a hard thermodynamic and geopolitical wall. Local utility grids are tapped out. Increasingly, we see water authorities restricting permits. And land costs near coastal populations, that land cost is skyrocketing. Increasing financial potential, decreasing economic risk. That is the mission of Soldiers of Finance. On that note, let's examine how legacy infrastructure is hitting a wall, but technology is creating a bypass and an opportunity. Today, we analyze a massive infrastructure pivot happening right beneath our feet, why tech giants, Peter Thiel-backed startups, and sovereign nations are moving AI data centers into the oceans in order to bypass power monopolies, slash cooling overhead to zero, and build hard, off-grid compute fortresses.
Nearly a tenth of the world's data centers are in this part of the U.S. The region is called the Great Lakes and is home to 1/5 of the world's surface fresh water, much of it naturally cold. Using it lets data centers spend far less electricity on cooling. The water gets sprayed into rooftop cooling towers, allowed to cool naturally through evaporation, and then used to keep servers from overheating. Fewer fans and less electricity, the method is called evaporative cooling. The trade-off, a lot more water.
Less than 1% of the water in the Great Lakes is annually renewed, and many ecosystems, city drinking water, industries rely on a relatively stable level of the lakes.
To understand why compute is going underwater, look at the balance sheet of traditional land-based server farms. Nearly 30 to 40% of total energy consumption goes purely to cooling, forcing air across hot silicon and pumping water through massive evaporative chillers. Submerged data modules flip the physics around entirely.
Waves are concentrated sunlight. Waves come from wind, wind comes from sun, and by the time it's in the waves, it's such a power-dense resource. The seafloor is 5 miles below you. You're bobbing. How do you take those forces to spin a generator or something like that? I started poking around on YouTube.
Wave energy, or attempts to exploit wave energy, did begin a very long time ago.
Garth, it turned out, came to the same conclusion. It was waves on the open ocean. There were all kinds of technologies being pursued that were interesting, but they could never scale to provide enough power for the whole world.
Most people thought about it in terms of you put something close to shore and you get the energy back on a cable because we need the energy here. We want to get it right where it's being made in the middle of the ocean. That's where it's the best.
If you could figure out how to capture that then that would solve the problem.
I'm pretty sure this is one of the first renditions of our current kind of system. What we have here is the world's first spherical piston. This is a sick, sick device.
It was very exciting. We were just working all the time.
We needed to go and actually build a thing, take it out into the ocean, have the ocean throw at it whatever it would throw at it, and actually have it produce the power that we would predict.
We've got this tube that's open at the bottom. So when this thing goes up and down, the water in that tube starts moving up and down.
There's this crash over and over. And when the water in the tube crashes with this constriction, it generates a high pressure jet of water. So now that high pressure jet of water goes into a pressurized reservoir, and then we can just let the water come out through a turbine. The turbine turns a generator. At that point, it's like a hydroelectric dam.
The ocean is one of those places that's still relatively untapped as far as humanity goes. Not much actually operates out there. We're talking about 70% of the planet being covered by water. You can get insane energy extraction where people just don't go.
What we're doing is figuring out how to use that power out in the middle of the ocean in a way that makes it so you don't need to make new power plants back on shore. We can do cloud computing, and it's just the same as if you had a data center that was doing it on land.
Deep below the surface, ocean water remains at a constant, stable, cold baseline temperature year-round. By using closed-loop heat exchangers, the ocean acts as an infinite heat sink, dissipating thermal energy directly into seawater currents with zero active HVAC power draw. Land-based AI facilities draw millions of gallons of municipal water daily, as we just saw on that report. Ocean-based pods operate on zero water discharge architecture, totally decoupling compute execution from local water grids and drought risk. Sealed underwater capsules replace atmospheric air with pure nitrogen gas. Without oxygen, humidity, dust, or human physical disruption, server hardware components experience up to 80% lower failure rates than land-based racks. This is not a theoretical science fair project. Microsoft proved the concept years ago with Project Natick off the coast of Scotland. Today, it has entered an aggressive commercialization phase led by high-profile venture capital. Look at Panthalassa, an ocean compute company that recently closed a massive $140 million Series B round led by Peter Thiel, with participation from Mark Benioff and Max Levchin. Panthalassa's Ocean 3 nodes don't even run power cables back to shore. They operate as 100% self-contained, unmoored, floating steel buoys extending 80 meters into the water column. As waves move the 80-meter node up and down, water is forced into a pressurized reservoir that spins an internal turbine. A single node generates up to 1 megawatt of clean, continuous electricity on site, running AI inference chips with data transmitted back to land via low Earth orbit satellites. Land-based solar operates at roughly a 25% capacity factor, and onshore wind averages 30 to 40%. Panthalassa's wave power mechanics deliver a capacity factor of up to 90%, offering a predictable, near 24/7 power profile. A traditional land-based data center costs around $11 million per megawatt to construct, factoring in land acquisition, power substation hooks, HVAC infrastructure, and local permitting. Panthalassa manufactures its 1 megawatt nodes for $1 to $1.5 million. That's an almost 90% reduction in capital expenditure per megawatt. Let's take a step back and look at the macro physics. What we're witnessing is humanity taking a massive leap up the Kardashev scale. A Type I civilization is defined as one that can capture, store, and utilize 100% of the planetary energy that reaches its home world from its host star. How does wave energy actually work? The sun heats the Earth's surface unevenly, creating thermal pressure differentials in the atmosphere that manifest as wind. As wind blows across the vast ocean expanses, it transfers kinetic energy into ocean waves, concentrating massive solar kinetic energy into continuous ocean motion. By placing AI compute directly on wave generators, we bypass intermediate conversion losses and harvest planetary atmospheric heat directly from ocean currents. This isn't just an infrastructure play. What we're looking at here is the literal stepping stone toward a true Type I planetary species. Okay, so let's map this up against Soldiers of Finance's core capital framework. By eliminating active cooling power, land leases, and transmission lines, subsea operators slash operational expenditure by up to 40% and capital expenditure by up to 90%. Lowering operating overhead means higher margins for AI operators and investors, cheaper compute execution, and faster capital recovery on hardware investments. Submerged and offshore infrastructure creates extreme physical resilience. Offshore pods are air gapped from terrestrial weather events, wildfires, land based power grid blackouts, and municipal water shutoffs. They sit in isolated, controlled environments protected from physical grid failure. When you control your own off grid wave power and cool your compute with the ocean, you eliminate counterparty exposure to fragile municipal infrastructure. Financial potential, it doesn't belong to those who accept legacy overhead. It belongs to the operators and investors who take the risk to re-engineer physical bottlenecks. The move offshore proves that the future of computing isn't about necessarily paying higher utility taxes on land. It's about building sovereign, self-sustaining infrastructure nodes where resource scarcity cannot reach them. I'm very interested in your thoughts on this subject. Do you think that this is the future of data centers, putting them in the ocean? Let's talk about it in the comments.